So, as you probably heard through the discussions earlier today, we're about halfway through the communications change. A lot of people are saying, well, wasn't it all about IP? Well, no, not really, actually. IP was just a bit of an enabler. What this whole change is about going from the old hardware-centric solutions that Tim talked about before to software-centric solutions and all of the promises that come with that. IP was just a bit of, an enabler in the middle of all that. And what's relevant about that is it's changing the way products are built. It's changing the way that we go to market. It's even changing the business models in terms of how you're buying it, how you're going to be using it going forward. And so 3 things that I'm going to focus on in this discussion is a bit about mobility, which I'll save a little bit towards the end. We're going to talk about virtualization and, quite importantly, software as a service concepts as it relates to cloud. So speaking of the business model changes, what used to be buy it from a telecom VAR or buy it from an IT VAR. If you're buying software such as productivity software, you'd get it from an IT VAR. If you're buying a PBX, you were buying it from a telecommunications VAR. Well, given everything is transitioning to software, you're seeing all kinds of new players in the market. You're seeing, traditional IT VARs springing up and saying, hey, we have voice too. You're seeing other types of VARs, say, on the telecommunications side, and would you like some productivity software for that? This is all quite good for the enterprise. It generates all kinds of competition out there so that your pricing, it gets to be much more interesting, shall we say. It also means that you're getting lots of choice in the way that you can actually buy the technology and the solutions that you actually need. So what you're seeing is an awful lot of channel partners now that are no longer a single type of product, type of solution. They're doing a lot of different things. And in all that, there can be a lot of confusion, which is why it's good to have a partner such as Britannic, who has all the surround pieces to be able to pull that together. Now, I had a customer engagement probably a couple of years ago now, and when we were talking about things like cloud in here 2 years ago, people were really just beginning to understand that. A lot of people have been playing with it back in the labs, if you will, in terms of taking telecommunications into the cloud. But I had a customer experience a couple of years ago where after we were talking about our portfolio, he said to me, well, Christian, I really love all of this stuff. The stuff that Mitel's doing is amazing. You've got some fantastic stuff, but I've got a problem. The problem is that when I did all my consolidation, the consolidation from taking technology out in the field into my data center, the consolidation of my people, bringing telecom practices and my IT practices together, I ended up losing a lot of the skills that I have. And quite frankly, all I can really do at this stage of the game is build out basic dial tone capabilities and maybe a little bit more than that. So then he said to me, what I'd like you to do is put all that together in some sort of a managed service type of program, charge me on a monthly basis instead of me buying capital, and you guys go ahead and implement it in my data center. And then he paused for a second and he looked up and he said, actually, I don't really care if it's in my data center. You can put it in your data center, right? And you guys run it from there and then just bill me on a monthly basis. And that's when it was pretty clear, right, that enterprises were beginning to understand that with the mobility of software, with IP, etc., it no longer had to be completely under your control by putting it in your physical prem. There were options to have that control, but put it somewhere else. So then you get to the cloud promise, right, which are things such as Tim talked a little bit about earlier, such as business continuity. If you're a business that, like most businesses, you tend to build your data center out to deal with maybe 10 or 20% of your operations in the year. You're putting a fair bit of investment into things like redundancy and business continuity in order to manage the SLAs that you have within your various business groups. But it doesn't always scale. What if you could actually buy business continuity effectively as a service? If you could benefit from elasticity so that you only need the capacity when you need it? These are some of the things that cloud promises. And something Tim mentioned earlier as well is the concept of templating. Let's assume, for example, that you're an auto dealership, given we're at a racetrack. If you're an auto dealership, chances are each of your dealerships are very similar in nature. So what you end up having is that what you deploy in that site would be the same as that one. So you can set up templating using things like virtualization concepts that allow you to set it up for that shop. And then when you have another shop that you want to light up, it's just click and it lights up as well, because it's precisely the same. Now, if you could do that without having to put tons of equipment on site, the simplicity gets in there quite quickly, the agility, the ability to move quickly in terms of transforming your business. This is all part of the cloud promise. And then when you take a look at what happens when you build this stuff out, well, as I said before, there's a lot of people that are bringing on new types of services. Well, you've got the traditional IP phone or the soft phone, right? You can start to bundle in other things like the conferencing, the collaboration solutions, right? Some of which you've already heard about. You can start to bundle in things like your DIDs or DDIs, your putting in long distance, etc. And so once you start providing things like SIP trunking, this naturally starts to come into a combined offer. But then the other piece that becomes interesting is the other types of services that you begin to link all around those traditional type of things that you would have bought. So now when you're going to a company such as Britannic and saying, well, I love all of this stuff in the middle, and thank you very much for being able to deliver that for me in a sophisticated way, but I'd also like to be able to buy things like email or storage. How about some productivity software, security, surveillance, and countless other types of solutions? Well, these are now new options to be able to buy it because now it's cloud-centric. It means your ability to purchase it is quite different than having someone come on site to deal with it. Right? And of course, being able to deliver the whole thing combined. Now, this is interesting. It's a few years old now, but I like this chart because it was a pivotal time, right? What we were doing back about 10 years ago is because of reasons of infrastructure, you ended up putting lots of IPVXs and technology out at remote locations. What people have been doing over the last 10 years, though, is slowly consolidating that into their data centers. A lot of that had to do with the IP technology underneath, right? But a lot of it also had to do with the software consolidation and virtualization capabilities. And so it's interesting to see how much has actually shifted from a distributed to a centralized type of deployment. What's also noting is in the hosted side, and this is not any specific type of hosted, this is simply taking what you might have had on a centralized piece and then putting it somewhere else out into the network. And that was a significant increase of about 30%, and it's actually increased a bit. But as you see a little bit later, that increase wasn't all, say, people shifting to something like IP-Centrex. It was actually quite the converse. IP-Centrex stayed relatively static. What you were seeing is people taking their technology from their data center, as it is, and moving it into the cloud. The other thing that's interesting, and I don't know whether I agree with the high end of that stat, but it's from Nemertes as well. From 2007 to 2011, look at the rapid increase in managed service adoption. Right? That's quite significant. That means, if that's anywhere close to the truth, that means a lot of you have some form of managed service agreement in place today. And so the leap for going from a managed service to some sort of subscription type service is not a massive leap anymore. So let's take a look a little bit from the technology perspective. As you gathered, I'm chief architect at Mitel, so inevitably I was going to get into some level of technology, right? If you take a look at the way technology is actually broken out traditionally, you typically had key systems, micro PBXs down in the lower end. You also had traditional Centrex down at the very low end, typically sub 8 users, and sometimes in the 100,000 plus users. Then you had PBXs, and then variation combinations of that on the higher end. And then what's happened with a lot of hosting options is we defined IP-Centrex effectively 10, 15 years ago, depending on which you take a look at. But there was a lot of IP-Centrex, but really all it was just taking Centrex and putting it on IP. And then there was, over the last 10 years, a lot of pressure for IP-Centrex vendors to catch up with unified communication vendors. So they started adding applications, being able to add capabilities, which really kind of extended their range from about maybe 10 users to up to perhaps 30 users. But it never hit the mark for enterprises. It was just not feature-rich enough. It didn't integrate with their business processes the way that their IPVXs did. So what you're starting to see now is vendors offering solutions that are going, say, from a traditional PBX play into some sort of a hosted PBX play. All the same features, all the same functionality, just put in a different place, just like the customer that I mentioned a little bit earlier. Further, if you take a look at the smaller end of the market there with the key systems, the micro PBXs, etc., they were easy to displace because typically you just toss them out when they stop working. There's not really much of a migration involved. So then that became a displacement strategy, something relatively easy for IP-Centrex to deal with. However, when you deal with a hosted type of solution for an enterprise, there's much more complexity involved. So even though you host it, it doesn't stop the fact that a lot of your business processes and applications may still be in your data center because there's mission critical pieces. It may mean that you have equipment in other parts of your estate that need to be migrated into the overall environment or integrated into the overall environment. So what you're getting is not just I can either do it on-prem or I can do it hosted, but the reality is that you end up with a combination of both, what we call a federated model. So going back to some of the things that have happened over the last little bit, we've transitioned from TDM PBXs to IP PBXs. Okay, that's fairly clear. There's probably not many of you left, that have still TDM-based equipment in your premises. So I think most people understand that. There's also been a decoupling of the software from the hardware. Tim talked about that quite well earlier on in terms of the separation of that type of technology and then what that starts to enable. The other thing that I think is becoming deadly obvious, right, is just how much mobility is playing in everyday world. Everybody, even the guy who was begging for money from me yesterday, right, had a mobile phone, right? And when it gets to that level, there's no one left, right, to sell a mobile phone to. So it's everywhere, right? And then, of course, as everybody's been talking about, there's been the emergence of public and private cloud concepts. So what's the effect of that, right? One is there's been a huge growth of UC applications, right? All kinds of capabilities coming out, the adoption, the attachment rates associated with it, right? The kinds of things that were talked about by the Avaya gentleman, right, was very, very good, right? Like there's all kinds of new UC capabilities coming out there. The other thing, as I'd mentioned, because of the proliferation of devices, is the whole bring your own device concept. And bring your own device is not just about bringing your mobile device in, it's also about bringing things like PCs in. Right, so I'll just give you a quick example. Our CEO bought an iPhone at the beginning of the year. He went to our IT guys and he said, I'd like my iPhone connected to the system. And our IT guy came back with a BlackBerry and said, here you go, sir, here's your connectivity. And he said, no, I don't think you understand, right? I want my iPhone connected to my system. Well, that's part of the kinds of pressures that IT groups are facing today. It's not just the CEO or their managing director that's coming in and saying that. It's everybody. Then you take a look at what's happening on the PC side of things. Company-issued PCs, one shape or another, whether it's Macs or Dells or any of the other types that are out there. But what you're seeing is people are bringing the PCs they bought and they want to be able to connect it into the environment as well. Well, that creates some strain and pain because a lot of the applications aren't built that way. There's also been a strong drive towards the data center virtualization piece, and I'll speak a little bit more to that in a second because it isn't really covered to this point. But data center virtualization is something that Tim did talk about a bit in terms of the Zen and the VMware type environments that are there, and you've seen a very rapid maturation of that over the last 2 to 3 years. The other thing that's happening when you take the bring your own device concept is a whole virtual desktop capabilities. So this is things like whether it's Citrix virtualized desktop or whether it's VMware's VDI, which they call VMware View, any of these types of things. To be able to take your applications, put it in the data center, like the desktop applications, put it in the data center, but then just give you a window on PCs, on mobile devices, on thin clients and zero clients, etc. So now you can get some level of portability going through all of this. And then, of course, various forms of business process integration, which are all key to cloud enablement. So data center virtualization, virtual desktops, and BPI type concepts are all tied towards the ability to leverage cloud capabilities. So virtualization, right? Tim just started to lead a bit into that, right? I'm guessing that a substantial number of you have some form of virtualization going in right now. So just give me a bit of show of hands right now. Who is doing some bit of virtualization in their data center today? Absolutely. So that's what I expected. And that's good. And so you know the economics of why you're doing that virtualization, which is at the very base, it's a consolidation of your hardware resources, right? And a lot of people seem to think, well, that means then that I don't have as much equipment. And that's all good. There's all the benefits of that, right? It also puts off your spending purchase as well. But a key piece of it is the management piece above it. So for example, if you're using VMware, and you take an application from one resource cluster to be able to do a vMotion where you take that application and move it to a new resource cluster in 30 seconds. Telecommunications equipment to this day hasn't been like that, right? You can't. If you want to move an IPBX from one data center to another data center over here, then what you typically do is you'd commission the new system, you do a backup data, you do a restore to it, and then you might decommission that. And that's just so that you could service that data center in some fashion. And you know what? That's really quite cumbersome. That might take a day or two in order to happen. Now, what if you could take your telecommunications product and be able to do that vMotion thing I just talked about with the email system? So you click on your, say, your Mitel IPBX, you move it over to the new resource cluster, and 30 seconds later, everything's running on that side, and without interruption of service. None, right? That's just a huge operational benefit. And so virtualization is more than just the consolidation piece. It's the enablement of the overall management mechanisms and then allowing your unified communications to be able to benefit from exactly that type of setup. So it's no wonder when we talk about those capabilities that, in fact, there's shipments of virtual machines now, so VMs, if you will. There's more of those than hardware appliances these days. Everybody's virtualizing. I virtualized in my own house, right? That might not actually surprise you. So then, something that's been done, right? And a number of people are doing virtualization in their solutions today, but it's usually ad hoc. It's management pieces, it's non-real-time pieces. A key thing that's been done, and what was cracked in terms of a recipe, was the ability to take hard real-time technologies, such as PBX technology, such as media servers, call control, conferencing, all of those harder things, and to be able to virtualize it, but not just virtualize it as in some cases what happens is they take, some people take virtualization of the applications and then they put it on their own custom hardware. Misses the point. You have to take virtualization and you need to be able to put it alongside the rest of your business applications, next to your email system, next to your ERP system. It has to be part of the same environment so that you can benefit from the overall management structure as well. So you can manage it the same way, get the same business continuity strategy, get the same templating strategy, right? All of these types of capabilities. It then enables you to be able to take your technology from going to, say, multiple locations as we talk about consolidation, to be able to go into a virtualized data center, right, as a standard business practice. And then further, right, as people start to talk about going from the cloud, that you've now taken your technology and being able to move it to your data center, but now being able to take what you just put in your data center, like the customer experience that I'd mentioned before, and be able to move it over to, say, a public cloud or a hosted private cloud type scenario. And that's a simple mobility strategy. But then, as I'd mentioned before about federation, well, you still need to be able to tie back to there. So I'll give you another example where one of our customers decided to go completely virtualized, and then they went completely hosted with one of our service provider partners. And the service provider had a very interesting aspect to his agreement with the customer, because the customer was actually a bit concerned about taking their prized possessions and putting it somewhere else and putting it in someone else's hands, quite frankly. So the service provider said, that's all right, because what we're doing is we're being a full virtualized VMware-based cloud. You're a VMware type operation. Therefore, what I'm going to promise you is if our service isn't what you hope it would be, we will just bring that back onto your premises and run it within your own environment again, and it'll still be with you and under your control. So this is a key thing of what's happening with virtualization. It's not just about taking, say, an IPBX and then going onto some big hosted server in the back end on racks or various pieces of hardware. It's actually about the portability of these applications and allowing them to move anywhere you need them to be. Now, switching gears a little bit around the mobility piece, I think it's interesting to take a look at the overall quantity. Right? We heard some discussion this morning about the amount of mobile take-up. And I think this is really quite interesting in terms of the amount of information worker transactions that go on. Right? By 2014, we're going to go from about 3.5 trillion transactions, which was at the beginning of this year, to about over 12 trillion transactions by 2014. Number of network-connected devices. Tim talked about IPv6, right? And a key thing around IPv6 is overall IP address space, absolutely. 7 billion devices out there. That's what we're talking about. That sounds like quite a large number, isn't it? And 4 out of 5 of those are not PCs. That's pretty interesting. And the average number of devices per information worker, if you just think about yourselves, right? The average number is about 4 IP-connected devices that you're dealing with. And that's averaged out. So there's some people who have way more than that. Some people are carrying more IP addresses on their bodies right now, right, than 4, I'm sure. And out of things like iStores, whether it's the Google one, whether it's the Apple one, whether it's the RIM one, whether it's any of those above, 350,000 applications, 10 billion downloads, less than 5% of them are business applications today. That's just screaming for opportunity, isn't it? And then you've got the other piece of it, where we take a look at who are the major vendors in the smartphone market today and look back even 3 or 4 years ago, and everything has changed. As an IT department, you're taking a look at this and saying, how the heck do I keep up with this? Well, the reality is, it's going to be very difficult. You don't really have a lot of control over this situation, right? There was discussion about consumerization and the consumer impact on businesses, which is leading to the whole bring your own device. If you take a look at Google, for example, right, at the beginning of this year, the Android platform got to 33%. About 2.5 years ago, it was only at about 8% market share. So it's been on a trajectory. You take a look at RIM, who's actually been relatively stable at about the 30% mark, right, maybe dropping a bit. And then Apple, who had a very rapid rise but has leveled off at about 25% over the last 18 months. And of course, our friends at Microsoft, who are a little bit challenged on their mobile front at the moment. Nokia's not here. Isn't that interesting? Right? Sony Ericsson's not here. Right? Nobody would have said that 3 or 4 years ago, would they? So some key takeaways from this. One is that a lot of mobile device impact, it's going to have an effect in terms of the way your business. So you have to figure out how you're going to adapt to that type of technology. And this is what people are referring to in the bring your own device again. Right? So speaking of bringing your own device, so you're going to have to be dealing with this in some fashion. And that doesn't just mean, oh, I'll just take it on and I'll just randomly deal with them as they come along. You have to have the underlying technology, right? And whether that's in the unified communications piece or whether it's in the data center piece, there's got to be some platforms and capabilities in there in order to be able to enable that type of solution. The business requirements are going to be an overlay to this type of stuff. And I'll show you some examples of how we pull this together in a minute. Okay. And of course, we're focused on this, otherwise I wouldn't really be speaking about it, would I? Right? And something else that's really important when you take a look at this whole bring your own device theme, it also implies that the focus around what companies such as Mitel are doing is not going to be about necessarily building the devices, but about building the experience in there. So for example, we're not building an iPad clone. Okay? It's just, it doesn't make any sense. Right? People either have an iPad or a Playbook or they're going to have an Android tablet. And if we were to build one ourselves, right, of course people would be walking around looking like Moses now, wouldn't they? Nobody's laughing. Are my jokes really that bad? Okay, so now pulling all this stuff together. If you take a look at an in-office experience, so what I'm going to pull together here for you is mobility. I'm going to talk about some of the hosted capabilities. I'm going to talk about virtual desktop infrastructure, okay, in terms of pulling all that. So imagine, for example, you come up to a hot desk environment, right? Most of us have these in our business environments today because most telephony systems allow that. Now imagine if you came in, you logged into some machine that was there, whether it was a thin client or a PC, you put in your credentials, and everything you were working on in a previous office is automatically up on your screen. So if I was coming over from Ottawa in Canada, and I go to our facilities, say in London or in Caldecott, and I just sit down at my hot desk, I can sign in, and bloop, up comes all of the stuff that I was working on when I'd left. At the same time, I'm automatically signed in to my phone, right? The hard phone that happens to be there. And all of my soft keys, all of my speed dials, everything is exactly the way I want it everywhere else. Or I could have done it with a soft phone. And this is the interesting part. It's a very recent development about being able to put soft phones on that virtual desktop infrastructure, that VDI, if you will. So now I'm starting to do that. Okay, and I want to set up a collaboration session. So I have the ability to have people who are remote, say on a mobile phone, to be able to initiate a collaboration session back into the business. Now, something comes up, the meeting is running over, because that never happens, right? The meeting is still going on, but I've got to get off to my next appointment and I've got to drive. So I'm able to actually take my information with me. So as soon as I sign up from my desktop environment on the PC or the thin client, the call automatically flips over to my mobile phone. I can then sign into my iPad and be able to get the collaboration session that was going on still on that particular environment. Right, so that meeting continues, right, and I still move it out. I have to learn to do these builds a little faster, I think. So now your collaboration is still continuing. So this is just a very simple example of how we've taken mobile phone integration, being able to tie it into what you're doing at your desk, being able to take your virtual PC and being able to display that on any type of environment that you want, and being able to move this quite fluidly through the whole process. So just to wrap up, right, a lot of what's driving cloud initiative is actually enterprise. This isn't very much a technology-driven thing. There is a bit of that, sure, but it's really about driving what we have from an enterprise requirement to be able to take our technology and have a great deal of mobility. So putting it in the cloud gives you that mobility, as I just showed you in terms of that whole virtual desktop infrastructure handoff. The technology, as you heard from Tim, and I absolutely agree, is maturing very quickly around virtualization. We've been running on virtualized technology for actually about 5 years now. We've been running on industry standard virtualization technology such as VMware for 2 years now, right? So it's really quite trustworthy and reliable. Right? The inexpensive quality of service and broadband is making it very simple to get into the cloud as well. And infrastructure as a service offers are so plentiful now, and this is actually one to dwell on for a few seconds. Infrastructure as a service is where you take virtualization technology, you put it on hardware, and then you sell that as a resource. So now you can take what you had in your data center and just go buy some of it out on the network itself. Now, there's so many players out there, right, that the pricing on this stuff has come down dramatically. And so what's interesting and what you're going to see around things like your data center infrastructure environments is you're going to see the same thing that happened with contract manufacturing about 12 years ago. Right? And contract manufacturing companies such as Mitel no longer manufacture within our own facilities. We actually built out with contract manufacturers such as Flextronics in order to be able to build our technology in a much more scalable fashion. We get a lot of economics out of it because they can build things across many different customers. But not only that, for me as an organization, I now have a business continuity strategy because quite frankly, if Flextronics doesn't pull it off, then I'll go to Breckenridge. And you know what? They're in different parts of the world as well, geographically diverse. So my business continuity strategy for supply has improved significantly because of that. Same thing's happening on infrastructure as a service. It's not just commoditizing, it's actually going for scale. Okay? And it's exactly the same type of thing that's happening. And so the question you also have to ask yourself about your own data center is, am I going to be in that business forever? Probably not. Okay? So then you have to think about the services and your services strategy to go with that. The good news is you can have it all. You can make all these capabilities happen. You can have the advanced communications capabilities. You can have the data center offloading. You can do the templating. And you can have a single business continuity strategy. So the future is fantastic around this stuff. And it's a great time to be involved in unified communications and technology. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time today.